Man. Whew. Hey everyone, today we're looking at the first part of Acts 17, and I'm so glad that we are plowing through this book and that we're not making excuses to not be in God's Word. Of course, this isn't how Trent would have had us go through Acts, but I have to applaud him for keeping us on course and keeping us moving with this. I've been tired and anxious at home, and every time I'm preparing for one of these videos, I find being in Acts refreshing. And the context of life right now really gives me a new perspective to this book. There's so many stories in Acts, like the one that we're going to read today, where God uses things that seem like big obstacles and hindrances to the gospel to ultimately bring about people coming into a relationship with Him and the gospel spreading. As we're facing obstacles and hindrances in our lives to seemingly be able to do anything, let's not make excuses or be lazy, but take action in each one of our own contexts to learn how to follow God better and how to honor Him more in our lives. With that being said, let's take a look at today's story. This is Acts 17, verses 1 through 9. Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there were a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus who I proclaim to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob and set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And the people and the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things, and when they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. So what's going on in this story? On the surface, it seems like yet another time where Paul is persecuted for the sake of the gospel, and the people who are resistant to the gospel seem to score some sort of a victory. Paul preaches the gospel in the synagogue at Thessalonica, and it's so popular that the Jews get jealous of the influence and power that's moving away from them and over to Paul. And as we've seen time and time again, these leaders resort to violence and illegitimate trials in their attempt to gain back control. Jason is the person in this passage who is hosting Paul and Silas, and so the leaders grab him and say essentially, hey, this guy is taking in weirdos who are disrupting everything, so he needs to be fined. As though punishing Jason and the others financially was going to stop the gospel. They say something that's honestly pretty hilarious in verse 6. "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also." Indeed, Christianity was sweeping through the Roman Empire, yet these guys refuse to see beyond their own little worlds, and they really end up on the wrong side of history in retrospect. The message that Jesus came, suffered, died, and rose again meant it was all about Him, and it was not about these Jewish leaders anymore. Looking back through history, we can see how large swaths of people flew to the gospel and never looked back. That's the power of the gospel in Acts, and it's really no wonder that it turned the world upside down. Now, in a way, this is just another story where Paul and Silas go preach the gospel somewhere. The gospel spreads, and the people who have built their lives around themselves and don't want to give it up kick them out of town. But pay attention to this theme and consider why it matters to us. The gospel can and often does grow anywhere it's planted, so no matter what obstacles we face in our lives and in our effort to spread it, we must never underestimate the power and joy that the gospel brings. We also see here in verse 7 where it talks about the world being upside down because Jesus is king. And if we really think about it, that is a novel concept to people who have their world set up with somebody else's king. But of course, we know that Jesus is on top of the world. He is the king, not Caesar. And so it's pretty crazy to see these Jews saying, hey, the world is built on Caesar. Caesar's supposed to be the one in charge. And their world getting turned upside down is actually the world turning the right way up, because Jesus is going to end up being on top and in charge. And so as Jesus is king, think about what kind of king that he is, right? Is he like Caesar, someone who just oppresses and kills people he doesn't like and fines people if he feels like it? Of course not. Jesus takes off his outer garment. He washes our feet. He's humble. He died for us. He's the kind of king who sacrifices himself for the sake of his people because he loves them so much. That's the God that we serve, and that's the king who is in charge of the world, and we can trust in him. As we're looking to spread the gospel like Paul does, that's the person that we're trusting in. That's the person whose life we are talking about when we talk about the gospel. Now, I hope you guys are having a great week. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys soon. Hold on, I gotta get it right first. Amphipolis, is that it? I think it's Amphipolis. And Apollonia. Amphibious Apollos and Apollonia.